Hi boys and girls, I have a read aloud book here and I am going to be reading you chapter 18. It is called The Arrest. Who do you think is going to get arrested? Under cover of the Manor's garden's plentiful shrubs, he reached for the front door unseen. The door was closed. The police were all inside. He crept around to the back of the house and down the stone steps to the basement room where he had found the ladder, praying that the outside door was still unlocked. It was. Holding his breath, he lifted the latch. Upstairs, he followed the murmur of voices to the drawing room. The door was slightly open. The Coopers, Mr. Higgins, Sam, and the 4 police were grouped by the fireplace. No sign of Irene or Great Aunt Dorothy. Matt crouched down and crept into the shelter of one of the room's large sofas. Mr. Higgins was speaking. As usual, he had taken the lead. "Another wasted visit, Inspector. You say Samantha telephoned young Matthew, but you already know how that young girl fantasizes." He crossed to Mrs. Cooper and laid a sympathetic hand on her shoulder. Poor Mrs. Cooper, and Mr. Cooper too, such a burden for them. They have tried so hard to keep it quiet. It is obviously not something they wish to have known, but their daughter Samantha is a schizophrenic. It is most unfortunate, but we are dealing with it. She sees a consultant monthly in London and of course is on medication. Mr. Higgins sighed, but sometimes I am afraid that the medication becomes ineffective and she hears voices again. "Is this true, Mrs. Cooper?" asked the inspector. "It is, Inspector," said the fake Mrs. Cooper. "It's a terrible illness. We try to help Samantha all we can, but it's not easy." Matt waited for Sam to protest, but she said nothing. He risked a peep around the arm of the sofa and his heart sank. Her face was white and her lips a tight, trembling line. It was obvious that she was under threat again. But he had to make her speak. Staying silent wouldn't save her or her parents. Once the police left, the gang were free again to do whatever they wanted. At best, Sam was providing another hour or so of life before the 3 of them were hurt. "Well, Samantha?" asked Inspector Ryder. "What do you have to say?" "I'm sorry," she whispered. Matt couldn't wait any longer. He sprang to his feet. "Sam, tell them the truth. Tell them. It's the only way you can save them." All eyes turned to him, and it seemed that everyone in the room froze in disbelief. "Whatever they've threatened you with, whatever they've promised, you know you can't trust them. Once we've gone, you'll be killed. You know it. Please, Sam," he urged. "The police won't come back a 3rd time. You have to tell them now." Sam's eyes widened with fear, traveled from one face to another. "All right," she whispered, and half rose from her chair. Then 2 things happened at once. Mr. Higgins began to draw a cell phone from his pocket, and Sam screamed, "Don't let him use that phone. He's going to signal Irene." Matt waited for no more. He threw himself at Mr. Higgins and knocked the phone to the floor, and then he stomped on it until it was in the smallest of pieces. "Why, you—" Mr. Higgins' eyes were murderous as he lunged for Matt's throat, but his lunge was cut short by the sergeant, who had him in handcuffs within seconds. The inspector stared coldly at Mr. Higgins. "I think we will investigate this after all," he said, "and for the time being at least, you're all under arrest." "There's another of them upstairs," said Sam quickly. "She's in a wheelchair." The inspector nodded to 2 of his men. "Bring her down." He turned to Matt. "Now, son, let's see what's in that crypt." "Irene's there," said Sam. "She's got a gun. She orders to shoot my parents if Mr. Higgins—" There, soothed the inspector sergeant. "We're here now. Nothing bad is going to happen." Matt really hoped she was right. "I know it's around here somewhere," said Matt. They had been searching for the grounds around the ruins of the Abbey for about 20 minutes. Matt, the inspector, his sergeant, and one of the policemen. Sam had wanted to come with them, but the inspector had forbidden it, and Matt was glad that she wasn't there. Who knew what they might find? "You're absolutely sure about this?" asked the inspector. He was growing impatient. "I'm sure. It's a trap door. I saw them opening it. There were lots of stones around it and weeds and other stuff." "Sir!" The sergeant was pulling away mounds of grass, weeds, and twigs. The trap door had been well hidden. The inspector pulled out the key he had demanded from Mr. Higgins and inserted it into the smoothly oiled padlock. "Police!" he called as he raised the trap door. "We're coming in. Put down your weapons." But Irene, standing at the foot of the wooden steps, still held the gun. She pointed it unsteadily at the inspector as he climbed down, followed by the sergeant. "Don't be a fool," he told her. "You can't get away. Your accomplices have all been arrested." Slowly, Irene handed him the gun and turned to lead the way into the crypt. It had been fitted out as a laboratory with benches, Bunsen burners, a microscope, and all the paraphernalia for scientific experiments. Brilliantly lit tanks held a collection of plants, and other lights had been rigged to shine on the benches. But the outer boundaries of the crypt were in darkness. Where were the Coopers? Then Matt heard a moan. It came from behind one of the stone pillars. "They're here," he yelled, and there they were, bound and gagged but alive. Their first thought after they were released was for Sam. "She's fine," said Matt, "waiting to see you." Back at the manor, all the gang, including Great Aunt Dorothy, were in the sitting room, handcuffed and under guard. Sam burst into tears and flew to her parents. "I thought I would never see you again." "It's all right, darling," said Mrs. Cooper, gathering her into her arms. "Shh. Now everything's okay." The inspector's bemused gaze moved between the real and the fake Coopers. "Well, it's easy to see how we were all taken in. I've never seen such a resemblance." Sam glared at him. "I wasn't taken in, not for a minute, but none of you would believe me." The inspector nodded. "Then I owe you an apology, young lady." He turned to Sam's parents. "Perhaps you can tell us what's been going on." And while one of the constables went into the kitchen to make cups of tea, the Coopers began their story. "We were searching for new plant specimens in the Brazilian rainforest," said Mr. Cooper. "We hadn't intended to travel quite so far, but the results had been a little disappointing, so we kept going, and eventually we came to an area that I don't think had been explored before. We came across a group of people, a small tribe who seemed to be extraordinarily healthy and disease-free. It seemed, too, that they lived to an exceptional age, well over 100 in most cases. Of course, they didn't have calendars or written records," said Mr. Cooper, "and we were communicating partly in sign language, but everything seemed to bear out what we saw. It appeared that they relied upon a plant which grew only in their part of the forest and had special qualities that their ancestors had known for centuries. And then we learned something else," he went on. "It seemed that the plant could reverse the effects of damage to the body brought on by injury or food poisoning or from any form of stress. We did see one or two examples, and they seemed quite miraculous. It's really quite difficult to describe how it works. I think the best I can do is to compare it with the system restore on a computer. Of course, they didn't have computers either. Anyway," he went on, "after a lot of persuasion and in exchange for all sorts of gifts, everything from perfume to penknives, a mobile phone, useless in the forest, of course, a pair of my boots, even a couple of locks of my wife's red hair, they gave us some of the specimens of the plant. On their return to Rio de Janeiro, the Coopers found that rumors were already circulating about their find, and it was not long before Mr. Higgins, whose real name they told the inspector was Angelo Garcia, had contacted them. They believed he was a reporter for the Correio do Brasil, a local newspaper, and gave him an interview. The interview never appeared in the newspaper, but a week later Garcia came to see us again," said Mr. Cooper. "He told us that one of his colleagues in England had Sam under surveillance, and if we didn't do exactly as we were told, something would happen to her." "We didn't dare go to the police," said Mrs. Cooper. She pulled Sam closer. "He was such a hard, cold man, we knew he wouldn't hesitate to get her hurt. Anyway," Mr. Cooper carried on, "he forced us to write to our staff dismissing them, and then we had to come back to England. Garcia and his mother came with us." He stared at Great Aunt Dorothy with dislike. "I think she was the brains behind the whole plan." "Once we got here, we were bundled into the crypt. It seems Garcia's accomplice had spent several days here at the manor and had discovered the passage leading to it. He and Garcia decided it was an ideal place to keep us prisoners. They smuggled all the equipment down there before they brought Sam home." Mr. Cooper hesitated and looked across at Sam. "They let me see her once or twice just to prove we were keeping her alive. They handcuffed and gagged me and then brought me up to the surface," Sam gasped. He smiled at her. "I saw you writing. You've improved a lot. More rosettes in the offing." The inspector nodded his head towards the fake Coopers. "What about these two?" he asked. "Garcia hired them to impersonate us. It meant they could visit the bank and other places in the area without raising suspicion. They took our credit cards and other documents. I've expected that they faked our signatures and drawn out quite a lot of money already." "We had nothing to do with all of this," interrupted the fake Mr. Cooper. "We're just actors, and we were hired to do a job. He told us it was just a bit of fun." "That's not true," said Matt. "They know everything. They were there when the others were planning to kill us." "Actors," sneered Garcia. "Has-beens. Neither of you have worked in years. If I had not found your photographs on the internet and seen the resemblance, you would still be cleaning restrooms and stacking shelves in a supermarket. I have paid you well, and you knew exactly what would happen." "And you?" asked the inspector, pointing at Irene. "Who exactly are you?" "I'm just the housekeeper," Irene said quickly, "but he forced me to guard the Coopers." Great Aunt Dorothy gave a contemptuous snort. "Housekeeper? She's my son's wife. Not of my choice, I can tell you. A dancer? It is she who wanted the Coopers' money." She wriggled her plump hands. "Greedy, greedy, greedy. Grab, grab, grab." "But it's you who wanted the plant," said Irene. "There is no drug plant," said Mr. Cooper. "Of course there is," said Great Aunt Dorothy. "They've been working on it for nearly 2 months. Of course there is." Mr. Cooper shook his head. "They gave us the wrong plants. They didn't want us to have their secrets. But I also think the tribe in the rainforest had inherited very healthy genes, and the plants just gave them an extra boost. All the time that you kept us in the crypt, we've known. We grew the plants on and did the tests, but only to buy time for our daughter's sake." Great Aunt Dorothy's face drained of blood. "No," she screamed. "I need that drug. I need it." Her whole body seemed to crumple in a wheelchair as if air were being let out of a balloon, and her breath came in heavy gulps. "I need it." Mr. Cooper stared at her coldly. "Well, you'll never get it, and I'm glad. You were prepared to hurt us, kill my daughter, kill this boy, just so that you could have an easy way to undo all the harm that you've done to your body. I'm glad we failed." That is the end of chapter 18. We only have one more chapter left. Why do you think that Great Aunt Dorothy is so upset that she needs that medicine? Why do you think that she needs it so badly?